Okay, this book, Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. Oof. Like, big oof. So a few years ago, I found myself only reading pretty much this kind of book, like crime, suspense, thriller, action-y sort of book. And I don't know if my tastes changed or if I just got really burnt out because this was all I was consuming. But I don't really read this kind of book that often anymore. At least it's not what I veer to. It's not naturally what I'm going to pick up. It's usually not of my own choosing. A lot of my friends and like my close group of friends, this is the main thing that they read. And because I want to read books with them and be able to talk about it, occasionally I will read one that they're reading. And this was that one. Enter Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. So a friend recommended me this book because it does fall into that like crime, thriller, suspense genre bubble that she really enjoys. And she enjoyed the book by and large. But she also recommended me the book because it takes place in Athens, Georgia. And we lived there for I lived there for 6 years. She lived there for 4. And so it was fun to see Athens be portrayed in this book because it doesn't happen very often. Knowing that, let me tell you a few things that I really liked about the book, and then a few things that I really did not like about the book at all. One of the first things that I really liked about this book is that I feel like it really examined and dug in deep to telling the story of survivors of victims of violent crimes, rather than focusing on the victim themselves. And I'm not saying that the victim is unimportant or is less important and their story doesn't deserve to be told. Come on. Like, of course it's important. What I'm saying is that this was the first book that I read that is, in this genre that focused on the family members and like the people left behind, so to speak, than the victim who's, going through it as we're reading the book. I think that in fiction and in real life, this story that's often left untold is just as important. And so I commend Karin Slaughter for like picking up that mantle and, trying to tell this story, even if it is fiction. And a part of that is that the story really digs in deep to grief and examining how grief and trauma can affect families like this in this way, and how sometimes it can bring families together and sometimes it can just like shear them apart, which is what happens with the Carroll family. And sometimes it begets something good, as is, kind of the case with Lydia. Her path is on this totally like destructive path fueled by addiction before Julia's disappearance. Afterwards, after she kind of goes through some grieving on her own, her life gets better. And I think the impetus for that was her sister's disappearance, as sad as that is. And something else that I think is really well done in this book and that the story really focuses on is that crimes don't go away once the news cycle is done with them. To that point, I think something that is really well illustrated in this book is that just because we stop hearing about crimes doesn't mean they're over. It doesn't mean that the effects have gone away just because everything's out of the news cycle now, whether it's solved or unsolved. The effects of this violent crime are going to continue to be felt for weeks, years, months. That was backwards. Weeks, months, years, and for much longer down the road. And I think that's a really important thing to point out that sometimes we tend to forget. And then the second thing that I really liked about this book is that it really utilizes place as a character. So what I mean is that this book takes place largely in Atlanta, but some of it takes place in a small town about an hour and a half outside of Atlanta called Watkinsville. Then the events that happened prior to the book that really like set the course for everything and, the violent crime that happens in Athens, which is where the University of Georgia is. It's in the 1990s, and it's just this great scene for a book. It was and still is like an amalgamation of so many different things where so many different kinds of people come to this one place, this epicenter, and converge. And that, in my opinion, is what really makes it work as a setting for a violent crime. And what makes it work as a character, because even maybe unwittingly so, like Athens as a city and just the way it's set up and the way it functions and everything that's going on there in the 90s, it makes it that much harder for the disappearance and the mystery of Julia Carroll to be solved. Like, it actually like blocks itself from being helpful. And of course, like there are other reasons that this mystery is not solved for so long, like corruption and small town politics. But that's kind of wrapped up in it too. And I feel like it just kind of furthers my point that like Athens works so well as a character and setting for this book. I loved it. I loved it so much. And part of that's because I love Athens so much, but also I think that it just works really well. Sometimes parts of this book were just gratuitous. So I saw one review on Goodreads, I think it was, that said this book was just 100 pages of torture porn. And I don't disagree with that. I think there is illustrating to a reader the extent of violent crimes that they're reading about, and to show, to give it credence and reality and authenticity. And then I think there's just going overboard and doing so to the point that like the reader becomes desensitized and numb to it, which is personally what happened to me. And maybe Karin Slaughter was going for this like desensitization, numbness vibe. I don't know. Maybe that's why she was being so gratuitous with the whole thing, in which case she was successful. Or maybe she really just wanted to highlight like and give authenticity to violent crimes and how awful they can be. I think she went overboard and I think it was really unnecessary. Then the second thing that I did not like about this book, that I did not like this so much that at one point I put the book down and I was like, I'm not finishing this. That was so stupid. I don't like it. I'm just going to look up how it ends. And I could not find a good enough or a satisfactory enough review anywhere online and synopsis of how it ended and how it all wrapped up and tied together, that I picked it back up and I finished like the next 100 pages of the book. But I really didn't like it. I finished it under duress. I did not like it. Was that at the end, like the big twist is that Paul is alive? That's a big spoiler. Like I found that so contrived and uninteresting that it kind of ruined the book for me. I did not like it at all. So there you have it. So Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. Not my favorite book. Not my favorite crime thriller suspense book. It was fine. It was fine. And that's probably the best I can say about it. If any of you have read it, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have critiques, if you loved it, tell me why. If you hated it, tell me why. And also, if you have any like crime, thriller, suspense novels, book recs for me, I'd love to hear them, especially since it's a genre that I don't read very often. Anyways, until next time, thanks for watching and bye.